Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Make Weird Music's interview with the great Tom Brislin. Tom has an extensive resume in the world of prog rock and pop as well. From Yes to Renaissance to The Sin, Camel, The Tea Club, Anderson Stoll, The Sea Within, not to mention Debbie Harry and Meatloaf, and any others I've left out, Tom? Kansas, I think I left out.
What I'm doing.
Yeah, right. And so yes, now Tom is the new keyboardist in Kansas, and we are just past their. I guess a few days ago it was the 1 year anniversary of the release of Absence of Presence, the
That's right.
terrific album, and you guys also have put out a live album just not too long ago as well.
Yeah, Point of No Return, Live and Beyond came out this year. So it's cool to have something to connect with our audience, even though we've been out of the loop as far as touring, like every band has. So it's good to be connecting in that way.
And you do have a few tour dates lined up now for this latter half of summer. Have you been playing dates, or do you have I know you have dates coming up.
We did 3 dates in May, and it worked out really well. And now, starting at the end of July, we're full steam ahead.
Cool, yeah. I was looking at the dates and I saw that you're playing at Oaklawn in Hot Springs, Arkansas. So I was telling all my friends down in Arkansas to try and check out the show down there. Are there particular songs in the set that are harder than others, or which one is your biggest challenge?
Certain songs in the set are obviously challenging, like The Spider, whereas I've got to keep going the entire time, Chop City on keyboards, and if you get lost, the band leaves you in the dust. Other songs there are other kinds of challenges, like something really long, like Song for America. And this kind of goes back to my Yes days, where the form of the piece is actually one of the main challenges. You have to know where you are in the grand scheme of things, and it's pretty physically demanding as well. So each song has its own Rubik's Cube to solve in it, but for the most part, I just have to stay on point and stay connected the entire show.
How important is it for you to match the original keyboard tones, and how do you go about doing that?
I like doing that because I'm a fan of those sounds, and I look at it on a couple levels. For one, as a fan of the music, I know that albums have a special place in people's hearts, and that's not just the music, but it's the sound of the band. And certain aspects, it's good to modernize. Like if they were really trying to emulate the sound of a string orchestra or something, then now we have better ways of doing that. But the synthetic strings, for instance, that you hear on a lot of the Kansas records are a signature sound. No one's going to be thinking, oh, those are violins. No, those are the synth strings, and you have the real violin over here. So as long as I'm kind of touching on these signature sounds, I think it's a good thing. And the band didn't say to me, we want exactly what we had. Because over the years, even Steve Walsh changed up his sounds live. So for me, I did a little bit of musical archaeology and really digging in. And I like geeking out on that stuff. I'm like, oh, that's a clavinet there. That's a Selena string ensemble there. That's a mini mode. And so I like to recreate that. And I have the ability to do it now pretty convincingly. So I just have a lot of fun going for it. And I wanted them to turn around and look at me and say, oh, wow, I remember that sound. And they did. So, and I think the fans appreciate it too, because it shows that I'm deeply invested in the music and want to, pay it its respect and bring it to life as good as possible.
And speaking of that, it's like the live album is Point of No Return, but it's also it begins with a series of sort of deep cuts, which was cool. Like I was psyched to see that Musicato is on there. And whose idea was to bring that one out from Power? I think there's a couple of cuts from Power, like Taking in the View and Musicato from Power.
Musicato and Taking in the View were on the set list for the Point of No Return anniversary show before I got into the band. So when I jumped in and started performing with the group in 2019, we went right to work with that long form set. And so it was representative of so many different Kansas albums, including Power. And it's interesting because Billy Greer, our bassist, joined the band for that album along with Steve Morse. So it's tied to his history with the group too, and I'm glad that it made it onto the live album.
I think it's interesting because Musicato bears the sort of Steve Morse signature. I believe it's probably a composition of his. Although it's funny because I remember on the Power back of the album cover, it doesn't list a composer because it doesn't have lyrics, so it doesn't say who the composer is. But you can probably guess it was a Steve Morse tune.
It's got his fingerprints all over it, for
That's
sure.
Cool. I always thought it was great to have Steve Morse in Kansas, although it was a bummer that there was never a violin player for that era in the 80s. Because there's somebody who knows how to write knows how to write for violin would be Steve Morse, with the Dregs. And there's also cuts from Mask and from Prelude Implicit and Freaks of Nature. So it was as a longtime Kansas fan myself, I was like, that's cool. It is nice to hear some of those songs that don't usually get to hear that much. And you've had a chance to play with Kerry Livgren for I think one show in Topeka, or more than one.
One show. We played in his hometown, and of course he was there and sat in with us on Dust in the Wind. And funny story about that night. One thing that I like about the way a Kansas show is organized is that we get to do a bit of warming up and rehearsing backstage before every show. The keyboard player, that's a rare luxury. Guitarists can bring their guitars backstage, drummers got their practice pad, but usually I go out cold. But not so with Kansas. We have a little setup, there's a keyboard back there, drum pad, practice amps, and we have this sort of intimate rehearsal. We run through this stuff, and even some things that might not even be on the set list for that particular night. And so when we were playing in Topeka and Kerry was hanging out with us, he was there while we were rehearsing, and here I am playing Hopelessly Human and these great Kerry Livgren compositions, and he's standing right there behind me looking down at my hands the whole time. I'm like, yeah, there's no pressure here. And so it was like I'm just, doing it and doing my best, and he's very soft-spoken now, and he just looked at me and said, you played that part right. I was like, okay, good. I'm in good shape for that. But it was really a thrill for the audience and for me too to have that connection on Dust in the Wind, to see 8 of us up on stage and having Kerry there. That was really special.
And for those that don't know or haven't heard Absence of Presence yet, talk a little bit about the song The River Sang.
The song The River Sang is one of the songs that I wrote for the album. And when I was preparing songs to present to Kansas, I would sing on the demos. And even tunes that Zach Risby wrote the music for, if I wrote the lyrics, I would make a demo where I would sing them just to kind of give a little proof of concept and show Ronnie what I'm thinking as far as the words and show everybody. So with the song The River Sang, it was the same kind of thing, only I came up with the whole kit and caboodle of the tune. And Phil and Rich, they said, why don't you sing this one on the album? Because they heard something in the demo that they liked. And it's consistent with Kansas. If you go back to the early albums, sometimes Robbie Steinhardt sings a tune or two. And as we're recording this, we just got wind of his passing. So he's been on my mind a lot, even though I never got to work with him.
Yeah, I was just actually listening to the live record recently, and the way that Billy trades off the vocals is similar to the way Robbie would trade off and take parts of the song. And both Ronnie and Billy have that. They have that nice Steve Walsh kind of urgent quality to their vocals that I was listening to the record and I was like, there's it's like the ghost of Steve Walsh in a way, and it goes to Robbie Steiner. They honor that tendency. It's not just I'm some guy singing these songs. It's like I'm singing these songs in a way that makes sense and sounds like Kansas.
And for me, that was one of the aspects that made it so unexpected that they'd want me to sing the song The River Sang on the album, because my voice is a bit different, and I never thought of myself as that kind of voice, but they're saying, okay, you're in Kansas and that's your voice and that's part of it now. And they were really vibing on the tune. In fact, my demo of it was even a little bit more straight ahead. And wouldn't you know that the the veterans of the band, Phil and Rich, were the ones sort of like saying, let's make it even crazier. Let's go to the moon at the end. Originally, I just thought it would be like trading solos, a bit more conventional, but they're like, let's have chaos ensue. So I'm like, all right, we'll go for it, and went all King Crimson on it and everything. So it was a lot of fun. And next thing you know, all of us and the crew are in the main control room down in Atlanta in the studio with mics everywhere, just chanting and murmuring and just making sound effects and stuff. And we knew that they'd end up on the record somehow.
Very cool. And I know that is it true that I think I had heard or read that song Riversank is sort of it was written as sort of an answer to Dust in the Wind?
Yeah, it's kind of a spiritual sequel, if you will. I mean, simply put, one of the main themes in Dust in the Wind lyrically is that, the things we do are pretty small in the grand scheme of things. But the song The Riversank has more of that butterfly effect kind of thing, where it's like maybe everything you do does set things into motion. And we were traveling out in the Southwest on tour, and we were in some desert areas and places where there were rivers, but they had dried up. And Richard said, you hear when one of these rivers comes back, it's an amazing sound. And that was, in a way, something that I was thinking of when I started to write the lyrics for the song Riversank.
And you also got to put, similar to Steve Morse, you got to put an instrumental on the record, too, with Propulsion 1. That was all you?
That was all me, yeah. That was one of the 3 songs that I had written the music for. The Propulsion 1, the song The Riversank, and Memories Down the Line. Whereas the other songs were written by Zach Risby, and I wrote lyrics for a few of them, and Ronnie also wrote lyrics for a couple of those. The funny thing about Propulsion 1 is that the main gist of that tune I wrote long ago when I was with Spiraling. But I knew that it just wasn't a Spiraling tune. And but I had it in there because, again, I just write indiscriminately and sort of sort out the details later. But so it'd been kicking around for a while, and knowing that the guys really like the prog stuff, I thought it would be an interesting way to present a short instrumental on the record, kind of like what Yes did with Cinema on 90125. It's kind of a prelude to Leave It, where and I knew that Memories Down the Line was a ballad that I really wanted to bring, and I thought it would be kind of cool to like have an overture before the ballad of just something really bombastic, and it hits you, and then we're out. And one of the main comments I get from people is that it was too short, and they wanted to continue, and I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Because it's like I want there, because who knows, there could be a Propulsion 2 and 3, and they're all like different chapters moving through time.
Yeah, it's the same thing that Dream Theater did with Metropolis Part 1 and 2. They're like, okay, we'll just put a number on it and we'll come back to it later, with something else. But yeah.
Or Saga with their chapters moving in reverse throughout the different songs.
Let's talk a little bit about Spiraling, because I feel like, Propulsion 1 probably wouldn't have been too out of place on Time Travel Made Easy. You can see my multiple autographed copy of Time Travel Made Easy, which has an intro. It has a song called Cold Open, which is just a short introductory instrumental that leads right into the first track. I guess talk a little bit about how, as a guy with credentials in the world of prog and one foot in prog, you chose to make Spiraling a straight ahead, like a pop rock or power pop type of band with Transmitter, the first album, and Challenging Stage, the second EP. What was talk a little bit about having one foot in prog and one foot in pop and trying not to mix the two?
Well, okay, so this is, I guess I'd get really reflective here, because when I think about it, when I was a teenager, I was getting serious about playing in bands, and I played in one group that was like the late 80s alternative scene, like The Cure and New Order, and some of that British pop that leaked over into like The Police and Squeeze and things like that. And I was also really getting into progressive rock, which I was kind of raised on. My sisters played Yes and stuff in the house all the time. And so I was getting more serious about playing keyboards. And so Keith Emerson became my idol. And of course, I listened to Yes my whole life, so I loved their music. And I started a prog rock band with my friends in high school. And it was dead then, too. It was 1990.
That's true.
And so it was like we already knew that we were outliers, that we were just out of step with what was trendy, but we wore that like a defiant badge. You know, we're like, that to us was what being alternative was. You know, we would play, you know, I was into The Cure and stuff, but I was also into Yes, Rush, ELP, and the like. And so getting ready to graduate high school, I want to go to school for music. I go to the prestigious William Patterson University Jazz Department right here in my home state of New Jersey, and I was really into jazz too as a player. You know, it's like the big oceans when I'm learning piano, classical music, and jazz, and rock was like kind of the extracurricular thing. You know, so I was getting into so much stuff. And here I was going to study another commercially suspect genre, jazz, you know? So I was like, okay, prog rock, there's no market for that. Jazz is like this very, you know, niche thing. And even though culturally it's massive and massively important, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to learn as much as I could about it. But it was, I was like going through college that, you know, I was getting all the knocks for my Tales from Topographic Oceans t-shirt. And
actually had a Tales
and they're
from
like,
Topographic Oceans t-shirt. That's amazing.
Well, you know, found it in the student center somewhere. Some guy selling t-shirts. I'm
That's
like,
amazing.
yeah, I'm the coolest kid in town. So here it is. I'm like wading through waters of so many different types of music, but I'm also getting to appreciate really good songwriting. Joe Jackson and Elvis Costello and those types of groups that I always liked, but got to appreciate how they crafted a song. And so I decided to start a band that had elements of everything. And I wanted some jazz in there. I wanted some power pop in there. I wanted some progressive rock in there. And also like what Sting was doing with David Sanchez and Omar Hakim and those different jazz
Brantford,
musicians. I love that stuff. So I remember watching a movie called The Commitments about the soul band formed in Ireland, you know, and at one point the guy yells at the other guy in the band for breaking the genre rules, says you were spiraling, but soul has
that's
corners,
where that came from.
And so I thought, why not, I'll call the band You Were Spiraling and just have no genre rules. There you go. Yeah, that CD was, you know, very early on in our existence, and we weren't really fully cooked yet. But that was in like 1994 when you'd go to the studio to record a demo, and they'd say, you know, you can make your own CD now. We're like, CD? That's real. It's not like these demo tapes that all fake bands have, you know. So it kind of grew from there, and I was into Stevie Wonder and Magma and Ambrosia and Sting and, you know, just everything, and Bobby Hutcherson and Miles Davis, and throw it in, because we're all like student musicians getting into it anyway, so we were all looking to improvise and also do some other things. And here I come with my synthesizers, putting these prog rock sounds in there, and that was a little bit not done as much at the time. In fact, when we started playing shows, I was routinely the only keyboardist on a given night of local bands. It was like, you know, the grunge and the hard alternative was kind of
That's true. It was very unusual at the time to have a keyboard-fronted, a frontman playing keyboards, or anyone playing keyboards, really, because in the 90s, everything was very, you know, post-grunge and alternative style stuff.
But in the certain communities that I ran with in the local band scene, it was all about being yourself. And sometimes if you were more of a freak show, the better. You know, these were like when bands like Flaming Lips were like breaking through with hits. And King Missile, and you know what I mean? So there was like this sort of subversive thing about just doing whatever. Like even if we were getting fusiony on stage, we were kind of like, we knew that it was not the flavor du jour, but that was the fun of it, was just trying to push the boundaries, but still be song based. And that was another thing, was that when you're 19, you want to be really mature if you're being serious music. And for me, it's like maturity meant not showing off on your instrument, but making a good song that had meaning to it. And that was like, we wanted to do that. And next thing you know, I'm playing in all these bands where they want you to solo and have a lot of chops and stuff. And that's fun too. But I know it's a really long answer to that question, but it came years later where I started playing with these progressive rock bands, and I have to laugh because I heard it so much back then. It was like, it's not really a viable career option, that genre. So, but I just played everything I could.
If you have the skill set to do anything, if you can do jazz or do prog or do classical, then it's almost like the horizon is so large you want to constrain yourself, because constraints are things that fire creativity, even more so than having the whole buffet table of stuff. I remember, I think it was Jack White was talking about how, he could do other stuff, but he likes to work within a set of constraints because it allows him to move faster and come up with stuff that he wouldn't otherwise maybe have come up with if he didn't have those restraints on.
Oh yeah, the parameters really can spur you to write. In fact, on Absence of Presence, as a lyricist, that's the one aspect of my creativity that's the slowest to develop is lyrics, because it came later for me. I'm always a player first, but I love good lyrics, and I like it when they're working. But it's a hard fight, a long fight for me to get lyrics that I'm happy with and not even.
Every writer will say that writing is horrible. Where it's writing is terrible, but having written is the best. It's only great when you're done with
exactly. Oh yeah, when you feel like it worked, and so writing about anything with a blank slate, that could be hard. But Phil Ehart would come to me with titles, and would say, "Animals on the Roof," and he would explain just very little bit about where he came with the title, but I wasn't required to write about that.
Okay, but Throwing Mountains, you did that for Throwing Mountains?
Yeah, Phil gave the titles for Throwing Mountains, Animals on the Roof, and The Absence of Presence, as far as songs that I wrote lyrics for, with Zach's music. Ronnie wrote the lyrics for Circus of Illusion and Never, and I'm not sure if Phil influenced that at all. But it's a really cool exercise to do, because that gets the ball rolling. I knew what the Absence of Presence meant to Phil. And I could include that or I could deviate. And then sometimes songs come out of the blue, like Jets Overhead with some, lyrically something I just kind of came up with. Yeah,
it's funny how sometimes I'll just write down song titles or album, they're like miniature poems. An album title or a song title, they can contain a lot within just a few words, and there's a bunch of directions that you could go with any short combination of words. I lost your audio there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was saying, it's a great thing to do, and you can look back on it, and it can just spur you to some new creativity.
I think the story behind Absence of Presence was that Phil was in an airport maybe, and he saw that everyone was just sort of on their phones and not really present. Was that the story behind it?
It's one of the stories. Yeah, I mean, I think he thought of it in a few different contexts, but it was coming up to him, and I saw exactly what he meant, because for me, joining Kansas, we primarily fly for concerts and tour dates. So I was in an airport every week and twice a week. It was like, especially, before COVID era, just being there and everyone's just kind of doing their thing on their phones. And the place could be crowded, but you can sort of be in your own world there. But there are other elements to the writing of that for me that I just let the listener kind of decide.
Makes sense. So you guys mostly fly to your gigs. Is Phil based in Atlanta now?
Yeah, some of the guys are in Atlanta. I mean, we're all
Yeah.
over the place. Ronnie outside of Chicago. I was in Nashville, and now I'm back in Jersey. And um, yeah, a few of the guys in Atlanta, North Carolina. I mean, it's like that's one of the cool things that we just can assemble in the
That's cool.
spot. And we went down to Atlanta for the recording of
Okay.
Paths of Presence as
So
well.
you don't it's you don't have a tour bus as much as you just fly gig to get show to show for the most part.
Yeah, no bus. We get a couple vehicles at the airport, do a few shows, and come
Okay.
fly back from wherever we ended up. It's different, but what's cool about it is as from a lifestyle perspective, I get to be home nearly every week, with
Yeah.
exceptions. Like when we go to Europe, we'll be out for a
Yeah.
month. When we go to the West Coast, we'll be out for a little bit longer. Um, just logistics. But it's nice to have that human element of, I did many uh, times in the tour bus with Meatloaf and with Yes and with Debbie Harry. Did it, and there's a fun aspect to it, but there's also
No,
it's not for
especially
everybody.
after a certain point in your life, you're like, I can't do the tour van anymore or whatever. It's nice to be in a good spot like that where you can that can be that's an option. Um, 'Cause-
I went out of order in my career. Playing regionally with Spiraling in the New York, New
mhm,
Jersey area, just going gig to gig. But then my first real touring came with
mhm.
Meatloaf. So I went to the tour bus, and it was a really, high end situation, touring Europe and stuff. Then after the first Meatloaf tour, Spiraling went on tour opening for
Right,
They
that's
Might Be
right.
Giants all over America in a van. So I paid dues a little bit out of order, um, but that was like completely memorable, and I don't know if I could ever do something like that again. But it was like we never will forget it. Between the shows, the travel, the adventures. I mean, it's a shame that a lot of rock bands don't get to really experience that anymore. But I'm glad that we caught that part of life, that the getting on the road and opening for a bigger band and meeting people all over the country. It was awesome.
Yeah, I remember I was in just this is I can't remember if I told you this or not, but I was in the car and I was listening to my shuffle on my phone, and a track came up that I've had since 2001, and it was from Napster. I got it from Napster where nothing was labeled correctly, and it said They Might Be Giants, and it was a cover of Take On Me by Aha. But I remember when I got it, 20 years ago, and I was like, this is not They Might Be Giants. And listening to it in the car when it came up on my shuffle, I'm like, this is Spiraling. Someone had recorded your guys' version of your cover of Take On Me and labeled it as They Might Be Giants, and so it put it in the Napster system.
Yeah, the Napster was suspect in that regard, but it also showed how diverse everybody's musical tastes were. And that was a big discovery. You look at anyone's playlist or collection, and it wasn't as segmented as the record stores at the time would have you believe. But yeah, we did our own arrangement of Take On Me as a closer, and that was one interesting thing about the existence of Spiraling is that for the most part we were an opening
Hmm.
act for larger bands, and it had an influence on our writing for better and
Hmm.
for worse. Like who knows? Like if we didn't get those tours opening up for these groups like They Might Be Giants or Violent Femmes or OK Go, maybe our music would have gone in a proggier direction if we were just playing locally and we didn't have to win over a crowd in 40 minutes, a
A hostile
hostile
crowd.
crowd
Yeah.
typically, because most, the way that works, like nobody was there for the opener, and they were just like, go away, we want the band we paid for. But we were just like, we went in with a fighting attitude, and we were like, we got to win them over, and we made a good strong fan base from there. But they definitely, that fan base liked the
Yeah.
poppier stuff, and it just, when you feel like you're under the gun and you got to win people over quickly, it lends itself to making
Yeah.
compact music that
Nice.
hits. That's why if you listen to Time Travel Made Easy, from the first album, You Were Spiraling, all the way to Time Travel Made Easy, they get a little bit
Hmm.
heavier and a little bit more in your face and quick to the point. Um, for
Yeah.
better or for worse. I'm not saying that was a good thing or a bad thing. It's just how it worked out. And I was writing the stuff naturally, so it just happened the way
And
it
it was
happened.
it was an interesting time. I feel like the early to mid 2000s, where we're coming out of the 90s, where everything had kind of, after about 92, the entire industry just took a step back from instrumental virtuosity and knowing and playing well in general, whether that's prog or whether that's, hair metal or whatever. But I remember there being so many shows at South by Southwest that I went to in that time period where there were new bands that were all, I guess indie rock bands, but they knew what they were doing on their instruments in a serious way. Like when I saw Dirty Projectors or The Bird and the Bee or Maps and Atlases, seeing all these, there were a bunch of math rock bands that were coming up. It was a time in which people were taking more chances and, exhibiting the fact that they knew what they were doing instrumentally with their music. And I think spiraling probably benefited from that too, because I was introduced to spiraling by my girlfriend at the time, who she had gone to the They Might Be Giants show, and she totally fell in love with spiraling. So that, I think, speaks well that you managed to, make some converts out of the crowd.
Sometimes it was hard to tell, because you're laying your soul out on stage, and there's always going to be some heckler, jerk, or whatever as an opening act. And so there were times we thought we bombed. And then we'd go back to the merch table after the show and realize that we sold more T-shirts and CDs at this show than at any other one. There were just more people at it, so there were a couple bad eggs and loudmouths, but who knows, maybe that emboldened those that wanted to support us and say, all right, well, we're going to show this band that we like them and we want them to come back. So yeah, I mean, it had a tremendous
You never know what the butterfly effects are going to be from, you see a show and that one person that really digs it turns it on to 20 more people. So maybe the 50 odd people at the show weren't going to do it, but that one person spread it like a disease, like COVID. It's just like, all it takes is one person, and you've got 2 and 4 and 16 and 32, and it just goes on over time. Because that was just one person at a show. That's how I, became aware of the band, and then that was how I kept kind of promoting you guys locally in Arkansas back in the day. And talk a little bit too about the reaction to Absence of Presence, both critically and on the charts. You guys hit some pretty high chart positions. I think it was unexpected.
Yeah, the Absence of Presence did really well. I think it exceeded everyone's expectations in terms of its performance, because we were at a disadvantage to begin with because we weren't on the road when it came out. That was the original plan. We were going to be touring with Foreigner and Europe.
Oh, that's right.
The band. Yeah. And we were going to have Absence of Presence albums and CDs on the merch table. I think Throwing Mountains might have even been scheduled to be in the set. We were at least talking about it. And so there was the situation to promote that album was all in place, and then it just all went away. And then supply chain issues ensued, and so the actual album release was delayed. So we had a few things working against us, because that can throw a wrench in the works of getting the music out to people and the media and the promotion of it. But since everyone was home and hungry for music, all of a sudden we had this album called The Absence of Presence, which was a complete coincidence. But it was apropos, and next thing you know, we hit the Billboard rock album charts in the top 10, which, rock is definitely not the predominant genre anymore, but I was really, it's strange because I've been writing and releasing music for a long time and performing with a lot of groups for a while, but I was thinking more people have heard music that I've written and co-written while we were locked down than in my entire touring life combined.
Wow.
Up to it, because the play, the streams, the sales, it was much higher than I thought it would be, and the CD was at Walmart and a lot of mainstream outlets too, which is poor record stores have had a tough time of it, but they did have a record store exclusive, different color vinyl, because you get the you got to geek out on it too and be a completionist and buy every color of vinyl, and they get the Blu-ray 5.1 mix. So there's a bit of that boutique aspect to it. But this is the thing. There are some bands of Kansas era that are still touring, and the fan base does not want to hear new
That's
music.
true. It's true.
Not so with Kansas. Even though we have a show that's more of the hits, and we have a show that's the Point of No Return Live and Beyond, which is the deep cuts and representing multiple albums. So we can maneuver around that. But what's cool, and I think this is the prog aspect of Kansas, that you have an audience that wants to hear something new, and you can take chances with it. It's not like the 80s where bands were pressured to have 3-minute radio hits. Now our label's saying, hey, can you make those songs longer? You can put some more solos in there. It's like the opposite world. And because the people who care about going out and buying a Kansas album are ones that have been ride or die with the band, or even new fans who came on board from, say, Supernatural, the TV show. They're into it, and we can do whatever we want, which is great. And the thing about Kansas is that there are still the hooks, the singable melodies, but we can also have an 8-minute song if we want.
Yeah, and too, like talking about the classic bands from the 70s and the 80s as well. It's there was the 90s. There was what I think is referred to as the trough of no value of the 90s and 2000s, where it's like things kind of go downhill, but then things that were classic only become more classic with the passing years. It's like we're going to still be listening to stuff from the 60s and 70s as the decades progress. Things that, because I remember Kansas, I had seen them twice before. I saw them in high school. I saw them they were playing in Springfield, Missouri in a hotel ballroom. And then I saw them in either the late 90s, early 2000s, probably early 2000s. I saw them at a theme park in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And those aren't quite like when I saw you guys at in New York at the Beacon, filling the Beacon, legendary New York venue. I was like, this is where they're supposed to be. This is where it's at. They've arrived at a place where they probably wouldn't have been able to play before because the goodwill has just mounted with the years.
Yeah, and it's sort of like a comeback, but it's not an instant comeback. It's a Phil and Rich and company and Billy and Dave Ragsdale, those guys, like they kept the torch lit, and they played the clubs in the 90s, and they still saw the value in Kansas and had so much fun playing that they were not going to stop. And when Steve Walsh retired, they wanted to keep going. And now with Ronnie singing, we can go back and do even more of the classic material as well as do new albums. So you're right. Yeah, it's interesting how there was a nadir and then an upswing. And the quality of the show is there. It's a theatrical show. And our light show is really beautiful, and it's not obnoxious. It's not like throwing bright lights in your eyes every 5 seconds. It just supports the music. So I'm happy, really excited to be part of this show.
Yeah, for sure. And one other question I had was, Zach recently left the band. Will there be a search for another guitar player, or will they just proceed with just Rich?
We will proceed as a 6-piece. That was decided, when Zach left the group, that we were gonna go back to a 6-piece, because when Ronnie first joined the band, I guess it was like maybe 2014, 2015 or thereabouts, they were playing as a 6-piece. When Zach came on board, it was originally to write and produce, but they liked what he was doing so much that they welcomed him into the fold. But that wasn't the typical move. It was custom for Zach. And it was really powerful and potent to have that 7-piece group. I loved it. And we'll miss Zach, of course. But when we played in May as a 6-piece, this was the first time I played in the group with a 6-piece. And between Rich, David Ragsdale, and myself, we picked up the overflow, the extreme, the other parts. And, Rich has done this many times in Kansas' career. There have been a lot of times where he was a solitary guitarist in the group. So he knows a thing or two about doing this. And David Ragsdale is a formidable guitarist. Yeah, he can really play. And there are other parts that I can cover on keys, even though my hands are in pretzels all the time with Kansas music. But we worked it out. And after the show, Phil said, "All right, we're in good shape. This is."
Speaking of playing guitar parts on keyboard, tell everybody here your Steve Howe story with Owner of a Lonely Heart. I love that one.
So when I was with Yes in 2001 on the Symphonic Live tour, we were playing classic Yes. In North America, we were playing stuff from the Yes album, Fragile, Close to the Edge, Relayer, occasionally from Going for the One, and then there were new songs from the upcoming album Magnification, which hadn't been released yet, so it wasn't a Magnification tour per se, but it was new stuff. So, of course, the band wanted to throw a couple things in there. It was confusing because the audience hadn't heard it yet and they couldn't purchase it yet. Until we went to Europe for the second leg of the tour. Later in 2001, the album was out, so we added some more Magnification stuff. But when we played in North America, everyone was fine with the concert. It was classic Yes. Conspicuously absent was Owner of a Lonely Heart, the band's biggest hit song. And I never heard one complaint. Even from casual Yes fans that were friends of mine that went, and they only knew Owner of a Lonely Heart, that didn't even cross their mind because of the massiveness of the orchestra and like Close to the Edge, Ritual, Gates of Delirium. I mean, the big guns, It was, it didn't leave anyone wanting. However, we get to Europe and the promoters are like, you got to play your number one song, especially since we're going to new territories that Yes had never played before in the former
Eastern Bloc,
Iron Curtain. Yeah, so they were really like, you got to play Owner of a Lonely Heart. Now, that wasn't a part of Steve Howe's history with the group, as we know. That was Trevor Rabin. And so it wasn't his flavor of rock and guitar and Yes, however you want to put it. So when it came time to play Owner of a Lonely Heart, Steve was the one who was just like, why? It's not me. And Chris Squire and John were like, look, we got to play ball here. We got to do it. And also, they like doing it. It's part of their history, and Alan White as well. So Steve was reluctant, and they were a democracy at the time. So, or they needed unanimity. So Chris Squire came to me and noticed that I get along with Steve very well. So maybe I could talk to him about doing Owner of a Lonely Heart. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I've been in this group for 3 months. And I have an expiration date. They know that at the end of this tour, it's done. So what am I going to possibly do? So I went and met with Steve one afternoon before sound check, and it was unusual. I wouldn't usually bother him during the day. And so he said, well, what's going on? What can I do for you? And I managed to say, so there's talk about doing Owner of a Lonely Heart. And he rolls his eyes and says, oh, they sent you. He knew right away. And I was like, yep, yeah, they did. And he very eloquently explained to me why he was resistant. And he said, look, that's just not my style. I don't think the audience would like the way that I would play that song from beginning to end, because I play a different style. And I just quickly thought, I said, well, what if I do Trevor's harmonized guitar solo on synth? And I just threw that out there, and he thought for a second and said, okay, I'll agree to it. So then I come strutting out, saving the day. So here it is. And that's how it went down. So if you look at Symphonic Live on DVD, Blu-ray, I'm playing Trevor's solo or thereabouts on the synth, and Steve got to play his way on it, and we still had some of that 80s flavor in there too. So that's how it ended up there.
That's crazy.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly,
world.
right? Yeah, because I mean, it's like obviously it's an easy riff to play, and the verse sections are just arpeggiations, but it's the solo that's really the weird part that it's probably not amenable to the Steve Howe style of guitar playing.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
quintessential
exactly.
'80s hard rock
What did you play?
guitar.
Did
Yeah.
not did you play it on the Alesis, or what did you play?
The Alesis Andromeda, yeah, my one of my favorite synthesizers of all time, which has been
Yeah,
very rare now for a long time because it didn't last very long in the market. But I grabbed one up because when I got the Yes gig, I bought a Mini Moog off of eBay immediately. Buy it now. I'm in Yes. I'm playing a Mini Moog. And then John Anderson and the crew were like, whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on. Those things are high
true.
maintenance. And also, John wanted, quote, new
Ah,
sounds. Because if you think about it, these bands in the '70s were using the
the latest and
latest
greatest
and
thing.
greatest
That was
stuff.
yeah,
It
that
was
was the
Mini
deal.
Moog, Mellotron. So he's still like reluctant to look backward, even though and I know that people love that sound. If they're coming to a Yes concert, I think they're gonna love Mini Moog and Mellotron and that stuff too. Because again, going back to that early question, it's the sound that is part of what gives people that emotional connection to these classic albums and these great times in their lives that they want to recapture. So John put the kibosh on the Mini Moog, but I was thinking I gotta have that analog synth
Hmm.
flavor. And Alesis had just come out with this Andromeda synthesizer, which was
Hmm.
brand new and had some of the modern bells and whistles, but at its heart was an analog synth. So I was able to get some of those Mini Moog type
I
sounds from it and use it for the most part, but it also could go '80s or modern, whatever you want to call it. And I was able to stack and layer different sounds together to make this sort of thing. Because I knew I wasn't going to fool anybody into thinking it was
yeah,
guitar. So I wasn't going to go for that. I just wanted to get close enough that it had to bite and had
yeah,
attitude and it
yeah.
sounded wacky and
Because they didn't
bold.
really have. I guess modeling wasn't really as big of a thing back then. Like, it wasn't
Didn't exist.
emulation at all. Okay.
No, oh, no, that's not true. The Yamaha did have modeling,
It
and
was
yeah, you know what?
infancy.
I retract that. Yeah, there were in the mid '90s is when some of those companies were coming out with crude physical modeling instruments for, say, like a woodwind instrument or something, or they could even maybe model an analog synth, which was one of the other keyboards I had on the rig with Yes was this Yamaha AN1X. It was called. It was an analog modeling synth, but I could tell the difference. If I was playing the Andromeda, I felt the juiciness of it. The Yamaha, they were
Yeah.
getting there. But modeling, yeah, was still pretty new at the
Um,
time.
with just a few minutes left, I want to tell people. Well, I want you to talk a little bit about a couple of really great records that I think suffered from unfortunate timing. The Anderson Stolt record is a really impressive record, but I don't think you got to tour behind that because John went on the road with Rabin and Wakeman. Um,
Yeah, he did. And who knows what kind of tour plans were even in the works. I know that Royna and John were just really into working together on this, and they were going to just make the album they wanted to make and then see what happens. I know that Royna wanted to tour it, and John really loved that album too, so I'm sure he would have loved to tour with it. But yeah, it was destined to be a studio thing.
um, I mean, talk a little bit about the composition, about composing the tracks on there. Was it mostly a collaborative effort, or was it mostly Ronya's material, or where did the material draw from you?
Royna
Ronya and
and
John.
John.
Okay.
They were the ones, Anderson Stoll. That's
Okay.
what's on
On the
the
on the market.
thing. For me, I came in there and played mostly what was
Okay.
composed beforehand, with a couple places where I could throw in some improv or some of my own ideas. But most of it, Royna and John, they were on a wavelength, and so they were
Okay.
doing that.
Cool. And also talk about The Sea Within, which is another tremendous record that is, I guess, a bit of a supergroup album. Um, how did that come together?
Yeah, well, again, Royna and Jonas Reingold, his partner in the Flower Kings, were gearing up to make a supergroup kind of idea. And they got Daniel Dildenlau from Pain of Salvation, who they've also worked with in Flower Kings, another fellow Swede of them, and Marco Miniman on drums, and got me on keys. And then there was going to be ample room for guest appearances. So John Anderson does some stuff. Casey McPherson, who ended up becoming our lead singer, Jordan Rudis. I mean, it was really fun to get everybody involved. That was a collaborative thing, but you had a lot of different viewpoints in the group, and everyone was kind of wanting something maybe a little bit different. So we did meet in the middle, so to speak, but it was definitely something that was a challenge when you had all these strong leaders in a group, and how much did each person want to give up to get to the middle. That said, the live show, we only played at the Night of the Prague Festival in Lorelei, and then we did 2 performances at Cruise to the Edge in 2019. That was it. But the concerts were very fun and very well received, and it was really fun to play that music.
Speaking of doing collabs and stuff, I think it's interesting that a lot of bands are studio-only bands or bands that do a limited amount of touring, but they'll put a bunch of different people together. First thing that comes to mind is Platypus with the guys from King's X and Winger, or even having Neil Morse's combos that they put together with Steve Morse and Neil Morse and Mike Portnoy, and they're all having these different side projects and stuff. Have there been any conversations within the members of Kansas to do more collabs with other bands? Has that been raised? The reason I ask is that I feel like there's a definite musical kinship between a band like King's X and a band like Kansas. The material is sort of similar, big questions, prog, but also just good songs, just regular pop songs, straight ahead songs. Has that been a conversation that's been had at all as far as collabs with different members of the band externally from the band?
Well, I have played with Jerry Gaskill from King's X before, a phenomenal drummer, and another Jersey guy, right, too. So we ended up on some gigs together. There isn't a lot of explicit talk about that because it's really, the guys are just so focused on Kansas and all that it entails. Because Phil Ehart is not only the drummer, but he runs the show. He makes the moves. So it's Kansas on the brain. Now, that being said, Billy Greer does have Seventh Key, which is another project. I am, probably going to have other projects as well, but they'll work around Kansas. But you never know. I mean, you never know who might stop by an album, and anything's possible. And we're gonna have another album.
I was gonna say, we'll put the feelers out. There's a lot of love for Kansas, I think, out there, and I think you could do very well with a big guest appearance packed album of just top musicians who are also Kansas fans.
Prague loves that. It's all about the feature thing, it's because it's so much more possible to do it now. And so it is fun.
Yeah, I think even just from there's just multiple spectrums. There's the prog community, even rock community, even the power pop type community. There are a lot of fans out there from a lot of different stripes. But I think that'll be a lot. We've covered a lot. I appreciate your time, Tom. Thanks so much. I would like to just tell everyone to go out and pick up, if they haven't already, the Kansas Live album that came out, as well as Absence of Presence. Both are just fantastic returns to form from one of the name amongst names in progressive rock. And also check out Tom's material, tombrislin.com. He also has a solo album, which I forgot to mention, which is amazing. I believe the Spiraling material is also still available. Okay.
Yes.
Both Spiraling records are fantastic. I think anyone who is into prog will still enjoy them, even though they are in more of a power pop type format. Check out Anderson Stolt. The whole catalog is great. Thank you, Tom. We'll be in touch soon, and thanks.
Thanks, Coulter.